Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for what I hope will be a very interesting, timely, and informative session with Arnold Randall, Superintendent of the Cook County Forest Preserves. I don't want to gloss over the agony, the anguish that's deeply felt by people in our community over what's occurred over the last week. I think some of you have seen the public statement that the Environmental Law and Policy Center as a team put out yesterday. But as people look for places to go, both in regard to COVID-19 and the desire to get outdoors in safe ways and enjoyable ways and ways that promote recreation and public health for our community, this indeed is a very timely opportunity to hear from Arnold Randall. A number of you know the format we use here. We have a chance, Arnold's going to fill people in on what the forest preserves are doing, how they're doing it, and hopefully the opportunities for everybody to enjoy, support, and engage in our outdoors at the Cook County Forest Preserves. And then we'll leave plenty of opportunity for people who have questions and comments, ideas you want to share with Arnold. You're not here to hear from me, you're here to hear from Arnold Randall. Let me introduce my friend, a colleague, and what I honestly believe Arnold is a terrific public servant for us. Arnold Randall, Superintendent of the Cook County Forest Preserves.
Thank you, Howard, and it is a pleasure to be with you, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about the forest preserves and the work that we're doing during a very difficult time, obviously, firstly with COVID-19 and now working with the recent protesting and real challenges in our society that we are acutely aware of and have worked hard to address our own house in the past few years on issues of racial equity and the public feeling welcome in the forest preserves. I wanted to start with just sort of giving everybody an overview of what the forest preserves of Cook County are all about, and not everybody knows all the bigger picture, so I'll start there. So forest preserves of Cook County are over 100 years old. It's the oldest system of its kind and one of the largest system of its kind and one of the oldest in the country. It's nearly 70,000 acres of natural lands in Cook County. Some of that's in the city of Chicago proper, but most of it is just outside of the city borders. And that's about 11% of the county footprint. So just give you some perspective of how big that is, 7,000 acres. And it ranges all the way up to Barrington Hills in the far northwest part of the county, all the way down to Lansing and touching the Indiana border on the southeast side and everything in between. So it's really extensive and impressive. We have diverse ecosystems. We're not a park. We have some park-like spaces for sure, but really this is oak savannas and woodlands and wetlands and prairies and rivers, and lakes and ponds. It's really the incredible natural spaces, really close to the third largest city in the United States, which really makes it unique and special. It provides a home to all sorts of animals, including the one you're seeing on your screen here, this river otter. But provides a habitat for all sorts of animals, both birds and reptiles and everything you can think of. No bears or tigers or anything like that. So it's a place where you can create your own adventure. We talk about this all the time. You're at most 20 to 30 minutes away from a forest preserve, no matter where you live in Cook County. We, in a typical year, offer hundreds and hundreds of program opportunities for folks every year. This year is different, and I'll talk more about what we've had to do to scale back to keep the preserves open, but some of the things that we can't do. But just to give you a sense of the things that are there, we have over 350 miles of trail, and about half of that is paved. The other half are more stone or dirt trails, more single track trails that you can ride your bike and all those kinds of things. We have 5 campgrounds, which we started opening in 2015 and have been extremely popular and successful. That include cabin sites and tent sites and even RV sites. 6 nature centers, which are locations where people can really get introduced to the forest preserves if it's the first time or 100th time, but it's a great place to get connected with the preserve system, and we have staff there generally that can teach you about the environment and do it in a fun and interactive way. 40 lakes for fishing, rivers for kayak and canoeing. We have 10 golf courses, so not a typical forest preserve thing, but it's been part of our history for a long time, and 3 aquatic facilities. And some people know, some people don't know, both the Brookfield Zoo and the Chicago Botanic Garden are part of the forest preserve system and have been. The zoo coming up on 100 years, and the Botanic Garden for over 50 years. So we're great partners, and both of those entities sit on forest preserve land, and we have very healthy working relationships with both of those institutions. It's also, the forest preserves are also our home for health. They're a great place to get healthy, particularly in today's current environment, where a lot of things that are not available to us, although it's starting to come back. It's a great place for exercise and just, getting outdoors and getting in fresh air. It is great for mental health, so I highly recommend it for that. I've used it for my own mental health for sure. And just being out in nature is good for you in general. You're getting fresher air, you're getting a chance to immerse yourself in nature. And there's actually been studies nationally and internationally about the benefits of walking out in nature, but there's been specific studies for the forest preserves of Cook County in partnership with Northwestern University that show your physical health improves by taking a trail walk in the forest preserves as opposed to walking down a suburban street even. And so we there's real things that we know anecdotally, there's real data that shows that's real. Our forest preserves also keep our communities healthy in different ways. So you have clean air resources. You have, it mitigates against global warming. We are big receptors of stormwater. So in the last month or so, we've had major storm events, and the forest preserves absorbs a lot of that water. And just imagine if there were no forest preserves, how much more challenging that would be. So a lot of that water goes into the ground instead of going into the water supply and sewers and all that sort of thing. People appreciate, I think, now the preserves in a way that they hadn't before. If they had not been to the forest preserves before, I think they're starting to appreciate the forest preserves for what they are for the first time for some people. And so people want to be out in the woods. They want to go, enjoy nature. People want to get exercise because, your gym is not open. You can't do that right now. And so people are getting out and walking and riding their bikes and running. We've seen unprecedented numbers of visitors this spring since the pandemic began and the stay-at-home orders began. We've seen unprecedented numbers in the forest preserves for this time of year. Our spring has looked like our summer during its busiest times this year. And so that's presented some special challenges. And so it's good that people are getting out and taking advantage of the forest preserves, but it's presented some special challenges for us too. So I'll talk a little bit more about our initial response to COVID-19. So obviously this has impacted all of us in very similar ways and in some different ways as well. So starting in mid-March, as the public health implications of COVID-19 became more clear, we started our week in mid-March with planning the final stages of one of our really big events. It's called Maple Syrup Fest. It happens at River Trail Nature Center up in Northbrook. By the end of the week, we had canceled that and just about everything else. That was a big shift for us because events like Maple Syrup Fest, we get 5,000-6,000 people that attend that over a weekend. So those are big deals for us. But clearly with the CDC guidelines and the governor's executive orders, we had to shift gears really quickly and to make sure that we were keeping people safe and not contributing to the spread of COVID-19. So we canceled all of our major events for the next 8 weeks. At that point, we canceled all of our permitted events, which was difficult for us. A lot of people permit with the forest preserves to do family events out, in the groves, and we have some inside spaces that are really beautiful, and people, permit them for weddings and baby showers, and we had to cancel all those things, unfortunately. And our volunteer efforts, and we have major volunteer efforts that go on throughout the year, we had to cancel those initially as well, and so that was a real challenge. And I'll talk to you about what we're doing now because we've started to move forward again. We closed places where we knew social distancing was a real challenge. So while in a lot of our places, social distancing is absolutely achievable because we're so spread out and so open, there are places that it would be difficult to achieve social distancing. So the picture you're looking at on your screen right now is Sand Ridge Nature Center. So we had to close all of our nature centers and the grounds around them because we recognize those areas were places where we couldn't ensure social distancing for visitors. And these places are great places for school groups to go and all these wonderful things that happen, but we couldn't ensure a safe environment there. We had to close all of our campgrounds, which was painful because, again, very popular. But initially we had to do closings there, and in places like Swallow Cliff, which is a very popular preserve, and the Swallow Cliff Stairs out in the Palos area in the southwest suburbs had to close, and we had to close all of our public bathrooms, including portable toilets and picnic tables, and all those things had to be closed off to the public as well. With 70,000 acres, though, different sites require different approaches. So everything's not the same in the Forest Preserve. Again, our first priority is to keep the health of our visitors and our staff and their safety as a first priority. We could not create a situation where people are going to be put in a circumstance where the spread of the virus would have happened. And so we didn't want a Florida beach scene, or you pick your visual that was surprising to see so many people gathering in such close proximity. We actively wanted to avoid that type of circumstance, and so that meant closing certain things. So we quickly developed, a rapid response team, which is led by me, our Deputy General Superintendent, our Chief of Police, our Head of Landscape Maintenance, our Head of Resource Management, our Communications Director, and our Intergovernmental Affairs Director. And really the thought was that this group would meet every day, and we do, and go through data, go through what we've seen as far as people visiting and what the numbers look like at different sites. And so we have people that are on the ground every day, and these preserves are listing, those departments that I mentioned have people on the ground every day. And we made recommendations about what should stay open and what shouldn't. And so basically we decided our trail system needed to remain open, and that people could be safe on our trail system, and that most of our groves could be open. But there were some exceptions, and I mentioned what some of those are, where we felt like we couldn't do that. And it's fluid. So certain places, as the weather got better, started to get really busy. And we recognized that some of those places we would have to take offline with respect to closing parking lots and really driving down the numbers of people who would be at one place at one time. That rapid response team meets every day. We take some breaks on weekends if it's slower, but if not, we're talking on the weekends as well. And we sort of worked through this process. So we wanted to be proactive, but we wanted to be able to respond quickly if we saw some challenges. We didn't want things to fester and become problematic. So closures as needed. This sort of goes through this process with us as well. Something that's, seems like in a normal year, a great thing is trout season. And but guess what happens with trout season and fishermen when they know that lakes are stocked with trout, they all go and they want to fish it. And social distancing was not possible. So we had to cancel the opening of trout season and not allow for the lakes that are normally stocked to be opened up to the public, because we knew from past history that the nature of that type of fishing, people weren't going to be able to socially distance. So we had, things like that. We instituted weekend parking bans at key sites. So while the preserves were still open, you couldn't drive there. So basically, driving down the numbers, and people who live nearby who could walk in or ride their bikes in or jog in, they could do that. But we were telling people, if you had to drive from somewhere else, do not come to these preserves. So places like Bussey Woods, which is extremely popular, Maple Lake out in the Palos area, Saganasky Slough, Catherine Chevalier Woods, Labaugh Woods, Bunker Hill on the northwest side of the city, all those parking lots are closed on the weekends, beginning Friday through Sunday. And of course, not everybody's thrilled about that, but again, we were seeing signs of it being unmanageable, that there were going to be so many people in one location that they weren't going to be able to safely social distance and follow the rules. And so we know we need to do that. And then we added a couple of additional sites for Memorial Day weekend, because again, that's prime time for us. People want to come out and do their family events and barbecue and, throw the Frisbee around. We had to close a couple of additional sites just for Memorial Day weekend, and we'll probably do the same thing for 4th of July weekend and for Labor Day weekend, because those are all really busy weekends for us and during the summer. So now we're in a place where things appear to be getting better. And we're being very conservative in how we move forward on this, and very thoughtful, but we're beginning to reopen amenities now that the state is entering phase 3 of its, sort of reopening plan. And so the rules have changed some, and that allows us some more flexibility. So we consulted with the Cook County Department of Public Health and the directors there, the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, which is a natural ally, and and a group that gives guidance, and other forest preserves. We meet, we have regular conversations with other forest preserves and what they're doing, and we sort of talk through the issues because we all have very similar issues. So we're announcing some changes today, so you're the first to hear it. Our campsites are reopening with some limitations because there's some guidelines about, proximity and how many people can be in a cabin and how close can your tents be to each other. So we're spreading it out a little bit. We're reopening our dog parks today because we feel like our dog parks are not like city dog parks that are much more compact and close. Ours are ranging anywhere from 30 acres to the smallest one is about 5 acres. So they're really spread out, and there's an opportunity for people to social distance with their dogs. And we observed that before we closed them. We were doing the observations, and people were following those rules. All of our golf courses are reopened. The ones in the city have been closed per the order of the mayor, but that's changed now under the new guidelines under phase 3. People can now gather in groups up to 10 with social distancing. That was not the case before. So that's going to allow for some more flexibility in how people can use the preserves. And our volunteers, who are really passionate people and awesome, can now volunteer in up to groups of 10, obviously with social distancing and working together. Some things still haven't changed though. Our weekend parking rules continue for certain preserves. Our nature centers and our nature centers and grounds around the campground, or not campgrounds, around the nature centers are still closed. We're working actively to figure out how we can make sure those get open sooner than later. And our public buildings, like our headquarters, are still closed to the public. Probably the most significant thing for most people is our bathrooms are still closed along out in the groves and along some of the trails. And we're working through what that looks like, but there's some real challenges to that. So we're telling people right now, make sure that you know that. And, obviously the slogan is know before you go. So you know what you need to do before you go and how much time you have before you get back, obviously. And we're going to continue to reassess. So it's a fluid process. We've had to be very flexible. And we didn't want to make unilateral decisions. We wanted to really think it through. And the goal is obviously to keep people safe and healthy, and at the same time allow them to engage in nature and enjoy nature. So we worked really hard. In July, we could see phase 4 for the state, which would allow groups up to 50. So we're already working through what that looks like for us and how we get some additional things open to the public. So that's my overview of what we're doing in the forest preserves right now on COVID-19, and I'd be glad, Howard, to take any questions.
Thank you, Arnold. Let me see if I might raise with you a couple of questions people have asked, and take them in the order you think makes sense. And I'm going to try to combine some things people have asked. First of all, with the COVID stay-at-home order, have you seen more wildlife roaming in the forest preserve? How's that changed, if at all? And have there been more visitors? How do you track visitor numbers, and what data do you have on the demographics? Is there any change in those circumstances given the stay-at-home orders and COVID-19?
Those are excellent questions. So in wildlife, in the areas that we've closed off completely, we have seen the wildlife coming into places that you don't typically see them. They're always there. The wildlife's always there. But now they're coming out into the parking lots more. They're coming out into areas where if we've closed off those areas, they feel more comfortable coming out into those spaces. And our staff who are still out, checking out those areas are seeing more of that type of behavior with some of the wildlife that you see out there. So that's been very interesting. And I think in general, if you give them space, they will spread out, right? It's their space. Anyway, we have definitely seen marked increases in the number of visitors. It's been, so we do counts, and it's hard to count everybody because it's a wide open system. It's 70,000 acres, but we do counts in parking lots of vehicles. We try to do counts of people when we can. And just, in knowing what the numbers typically look like for the spring, for example, that's what we're coming out of right now. It's been, as I mentioned in my comments, it's been like summertime on a 4th of July. It's, you've had all these people coming out in big numbers. And, the obvious reasons are, their options are limited. And you see a lot of people who, look like they've been there before, but you see people who probably never been there before. And so that's been good and that's been bad in some ways, because I think sometimes people are not realizing like it's really important to stay on the trails and not trample sensitive areas. And so we've had some of those challenges. we've had some challenges with poaching, to be frank. And so that's something we sort of really have to nail down with people, that is illegal, and it will have deleterious effects to the system. If everybody decided just to take something home with them, that's a problem, right? And so that can't happen, and there's laws against it. I think with diversity, I think you're seeing a good mix of people coming out, and we've worked really hard over almost 10 years here that I've been here, to really get more people who traditionally had not come out to the forest preserves to feel comfortable. We've done that through programming, through our conservation corps, which is extremely diverse, and really trying to connect with communities of color to get more people out and comfortable with nature. And there's a lot of reasons why historically people have not been. Some of that has to do with the forest preserve, some of that has to do with our society in general. And so we're cognizant of that, and we're working hard on that. But I think you're seeing just more people in general out in big numbers. So we just hope after this is all over that they're still coming out. Because we want them to be here.
Look, the forest preserves have a unique role, as you and I have discussed. Full disclosure, as I think some of you know, I've served and had the pleasure of serving as a board member on the Forest Preserve Foundation since the beginning. And we work very closely with Arnold and with the Forest Preserve District of Cook County. And one of the observations, at least I've had, Arnold, is how remarkable it is if today somebody tried to create almost 70,000 acres of forest preserve for wildlife, for conservation, for biodiversity, for prairie, for people to fish, to use and enjoy, that'd be impossible.
Right.
It was a wonderful, far-sighted decision, and under your leadership and President Preckwinkle's leadership, you've been adding some pieces, which makes an excellent, wonderful place even better for folks. Couple people have questions in different ways, and I'll see if I can put them together. Can you really absorb, if you will, the increased use by people, which is something we want? We want people to use, visit, enjoy the forest preserves. Is there a capacity you're hitting where there are so many people, particularly with social distancing, that you're going to have to try to find a way to manage the trail use and the off-trail use differently? How are you thinking about that going forward, both today and assuming that there's going to be hopefully more people using some of the places in the future?
So if all 5.2 million or whatever it is residents of Cook County came out at the same time, no, right? Obviously, we can't handle that.
Yeah.
What we found is that we can absorb more people, but we have to redirect them. Like if they all want to come to Bussey Woods or Dan Ryan Woods, for example, which are two extremely popular locations in the system, we found that we've had to close some of those parking lots because there are just too many coming at one time. And we were trying to redirect people to other places that are just as beautiful or even more beautiful, depending on where you go, to get out and enjoy nature and get on the trail. So that's our challenge, I think, is to redirect people to places that are not quite as busy, that have space. And, we do that through our website. I think we have a wonderful website with great mapping tools, and it can show you how to get to your nearest forest preserve. And we have a page specific to COVID-19. So that's sort of your do's and don'ts of what to do if you're going to come to the forest preserves, because if you're expecting to come out and do a cookout and bring your cooler right now, that just can't happen, and we're going to ask you not to do that. So it's better to know that ahead of time. So I think it's an educational opportunity, and we're working hard to make sure the public knows through signage. We put out a few thousand signs at this point, which I'm not a sign fan, but these are temporary signage because we need people to know.
It's a lot.
Yeah, you ask my staff, I'm the one saying, why do we have all these signs typically? But for this, and they're temporary, to say, remind people about social distancing, what you can and can't do, in positive terms, and reminding people that we want you to be there, but you got to do it safely. So there's a strong piece of education. So ultimately, if people are coming back after this is all better, with respect to the pandemic, if we can keep people spread out to different places, I think we can handle a lot more people, but it's going to be a challenge, no doubt.
And I know there's been a lot of budget pressure with the forest preserves, and that particularly affects what you're able to do when it comes to conservation and habitat restoration, and the good work that's done of how do you manage multiple purposes, enabling, as you've described, more kids from throughout the community to come and camp in different places and enjoy the outdoors. And at the same time, continue some of the conservation and ecological restoration. In addition to our being willing to support a bond referendum when it comes up, which we hope there's the right opportunity to do it and that the public will strongly support. How are you thinking about those finances? And frankly, what else can people who are on this call who love and enjoy the forest preserves, what can we do to help?
Thank you. That's a great question, Howard. So pre-pandemic, we were considering strongly last year putting a bond language on, or a referendum language on the ballot for people to vote on, increasing our ability to raise additional dollars for the forest preserves. And if you don't know, if you're living in Cook County, you're paying about 1% of your property tax bill for the forest preserves, which also includes significant support for the Brookfield Zoo and the Chicago Botanic Garden. So I think it's probably the best deal in town from my perspective, because you've got 70,000 acres of land and you get to use it, and the vast majority of our programming is free to the public. So pre-pandemic, we were really looking at that because we recognize we've tried to be good stewards of the land and the resources that we have. And we've built some new things and we tried to fix some old things, but like everybody, we have a list that's longer than we have resources of things that need to get done. We didn't pursue it at that time. And we decided that we would work with the state legislature to get some additional resources that way. And so we've had some success there in getting some dollars for capital improvement, which we're thrilled about. But there's an operational challenge for us as well. So, we're operating on a pretty small budget with respect to a government agency. And there's a master plan for the forest preserves, the conservation, our big conservation plan, and what we look like 25, 50 years from now. And that includes things like buying more land and preserving more land, because as we continue to develop, those things are at risk, right? A lot of that farmland and open spaces that are privately held now could be strip malls and subdivisions. And so, those are nice things, but it's important to have nature to be protected. Connecting with more people, good governance, and, sort of the economic value of having forest preserves are all part of that much larger plan for the forest preserve. And it's our next century conservation plan. So we're not just saying, hey, help us because we're struggling. We're saying help us because there's a whole lot more that we can do with the resources that we have now, but there's a lot more we could do if we had more resources. So there's a need for that. Now we're in this pandemic. So there's implications there for us like everybody else. And the reality is we're gonna have less revenue coming in because, number one, we've had to close all of our concessions. They're going to start to reopen some of those with some limitations. So all that concession money is knocked out, or a good portion. And then the reality is that people, are going to, if they don't have a job and they can't pay their mortgage, we're going to get less property tax money. And so we understand that's a reality and not a complaint, just an observation, which means we've already looked at our predictions that we're going to have less money to work with this year and next year.
Hey,
so
Arnold,
make some tough choices.
We try to wrap these up within about a half an hour, and we have a number of questions. Let me see if I can just toss you the ultimate softball. Three things, people, about 100 people have joined this webinar with you. Three things. What are the three most important things people should know about and think about and do with the forest preserves? And if you want to make it four, Go ahead. I don't want to jam you.
No. I think number one, just be aware that they're here and that they're here for you as a member of the public here in the region. We have people coming nationally and internationally actually come to the forest preserves, that they're here, that they're valuable to you. So whether you come or not, we want you to come at some point, but if you can, or you say, well, I'm not going to, that there's real value to you because, your air is cleaner because you've got these 70,000 acres. If you live in an area that floods, it would flood worse. And if you live in an area that doesn't flood, it probably has something to do with having all these natural lands around you. There's real value and quality of life issues with having forest preserves here. And then they're just protecting the nature. Like, there are things that exist in the forest preserve, plants, animals, bugs, that wouldn't exist if there were no forest preserves. And you got to think about what that means, that there's 100, and I think the last time I checked, 112 endangered species, both plants and animals, that exist in the forest preserves of Cook County. If there were no forest preserves of Cook County, they would not exist here for sure, and in some cases they might be extirpated completely, like they would not be anywhere. And so there's a challenge, you know, of we've got to protect that, and if you value nature at all, or just the idea of nature, that protecting the forest preserves is really important, and growing them is really the goal, you know, and protecting more land as we become more and more populated, more and more people live in urban areas, got to protect that land. So all those things are really important to remember. The ultimate selling point is just to come out and walk a trail, and you'll know what I'm talking about.
Get outside and enjoy it. Arnold,
Yes.
Really, thank you for joining us today, but more fundamentally, and I mean it, thank you for all you've been doing to make the forest preserves a really good place for people, for the wildlife, for the biodiversity in places we're protecting, and all that I know you're going to be doing going forward. So if there are ways in which we can be helpful, as always, you know, call upon us, we'll do it at ELPC, but also within the broader community of people who care deeply about the forest preserves. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you to Arnold in particular. Take care,
Howard.
See you soon. Bye.